Hi guys, thank you for clicking on this video. My name's Aisha and this is aishaleeanntalks. So today's video is really quite shocking and I feel like it should come with a bit of a trigger warning to begin with. So we are going to be talking about quite serious sexual assaults and quite a lot of them. So a 64-year-old gynecologist who worked at the quite prestigious Columbia University Irving Medical Center and the New York Presbyterian Hospital, named Dr. Robert Hadden, has been sentenced to 20 years in prison after being accused of sexually assaulting over 240 of his vulnerable patients, most of which were pregnant at the time. These stories are genuinely really quite shocking, and there is quite a lot of them, so I'm only going to focus on a couple of them, the ones that sparked the trials and made it into quite public eye. But all of these abuse claims seem to mirror one another. They're all very similar in the way that he would abuse his patients. He kind of used the same tactics all the way through. So once you've heard a couple of the stories, you know, they're all pretty similar. Now, the very first sexual abuse claim against Dr. Hadden came in 1994, which means that he has been abusing his patients for literal decades. The most publicised account was that of Evelyn Yang, who is the wife of presidential candidate Andrew Yang. Now, she says that she was very first sexually assaulted by Dr. Hadden when she was pregnant with her first child back in 2012. When Evelyn first started going to see Dr. Hadden, everything seemed absolutely fine. It wasn't until he started asking quite inappropriate questions about her sexual relationship with her husband that she began to think something was a little bit off. These questions obviously made Evelyn quite uncomfortable, but so did the idea of changing doctors halfway through her pregnancy. So she just kind of stuck with the doctor. What she said was, what I kept sticking to was this: okay, so my doctor is pervy, I have a pervy doctor, but I'm going to focus on having a healthy baby.
It started with inappropriate questions around how intimate I was with my husband, sexual activity, just very inappropriate, probing questions that were unrelated to my health. The examinations became longer, more frequent, and I learned that they were unnecessary most of the time. Most women don't know what you're supposed to get when you're pregnant. I didn't know that you're not supposed to get an exam every time you went to see the doctor. I feel like I put up with some inappropriate behavior that I didn't know at the time was straight up sexual abuse / sexual assault until much later. And I regret having put up with that.
But then things took quite a sickening turn when she went in for a routine appointment when she was 7 months pregnant. He was talking about something about her needing a C-section, and at this point he ended up putting his ungloved fingers inside of her. Evelyn had said that she knew she was being assaulted, but she just couldn't move. She was kind of frozen like a deer in headlights.
I was dressed and ready to go, and then at the last minute he kind of made up an excuse. He said something about, I think you might need a C-section. And he proceeded to grab me over to him and undress me and examine me internally, ungloved. And at first, I was a little bit like, what's going on here? I was confused, and then I realized what was happening, and then I just kind of froze. Like a deer in headlights, just frozen. I knew it was happening. I remember trying to fix my eyes on a spot on the wall and just trying to avoid seeing his face as he was assaulting me.
Was it
Just waiting for it to be over.
Evelyn didn't tell anybody straight away about what had happened to her. She kept it all pretty much to herself until she received a letter. The letter was stating that Dr. Hadden had moved from the practice that she was at. And it was at this point that she decided that she was going to Google his name. So when she Googled his name, a few articles came up, and this is how she found out that he had abused other people too.
I Googled him, and there it was. There was a headline that said that he had assaulted another woman, and she reported it to the police. And at that moment, everything just stood still. It was this sense of relief, of finally realizing that I wasn't alone in it. He still picked me, but that it wasn't because of, it wasn't something that I did. It was, this was a serial predator. And he just picked me as his prey.
When she read the reports, Evelyn then confided in her husband, and she told him everything that happened during that awful appointment. And shortly after this, she joined an open case at the Manhattan District Attorney Office, and she found that there were at least 17 other women coming forward with claims at this time. At first, Evelyn fought to remain anonymous, but after some time she decided to do an interview about her experience. And it was after she did this interview, and it went quite, viral. A lot of people saw this interview, that other people started coming forward and making claims about Dr. Hadden too, including the woman who had written the letter back in 1994. She's actually come forward to explain what had happened to her back then and with the letter. So this is when a woman named Diane Monson saw the interview, and she was reminded of her 1993 appointment with Dr. Hadden, and it suddenly dawned on her that the hospital had actually been made aware of his misconduct a long time ago. Back in 1993, Diane, who was 33 at the time, was pregnant with her second child, and she was looking for a gynecologist closer to her home in Manhattan. And it was at this point that her friend suggested that she go and see one of her colleagues, Dr. Hadden, at the Columbian Presbyterian Hospital. Diane went to her first routine appointment with the gynecologist, and she said everything seemed normal at first, but then she was given an exam that was unlike any other that she'd ever experienced before. Diane said that she'd had multiple breast exams in the past, and that the doctors would start on the outside of the breasts and that they would palpate inwards towards the nipple. Dr. Hadden just did basically a whole lot of feeling around and concluded each breast exam by pulling really hard on her nipple. Then it was time for her pelvic exam. While she was led on the examination table, Dr. Hadden pushed her legs as wide open as possible and began touching her very inappropriately. When she let out a gasp, he then told her that he was just lubricating the outer area, but he said this in such a fashion that it actually seemed like it was a normal thing to be doing. But then he put his fingers inside her. Diane said that there was actually a nurse present for this exam, but that she was just standing against the counter with her backs to them. When Diane got home, she was mulling over this appointment, and it was actually only at this point that it kind of dawned on her and she had the realization of what had actually happened. She explained, "I was just sitting on the couch and I was thinking about the exam, and it was just like a light bulb went off. I just knew it and I just started sobbing and sobbing." She told her husband what happened. They then decided that they would document everything and that they would write a letter to the hospital. After hearing Evelyn's interview, Diane then went to look for this letter that she sent back in 1994. She managed to find a copy of this letter on an old USB stick, and she actually found the response letter that she got from the hospital in a box of paperwork in her basement. Now, this letter is 3 pages long, and I have not actually managed to find a full version of it. I've only got bits of it, but it begins by saying, "You may be wondering why it has taken me 7 months to write this letter. The chief reason is that I have been overloaded with the difficulties of pregnancy. Secondarily, this isn't a letter that I've been looking forward to writing. It is not a pleasant prospect to describe on paper an incident that left me feeling ultimately violated." Diane then goes on to explain exactly what happened to her during the interview. I'm not going to read that bit out because it does go into a lot more detail, and I just don't feel like that is necessary or appropriate. But after explaining the details of the assault, she said, "The nurse in the room seemed to be looking the other way. During the breast exam, she had her back half turned to us, and while she did assist during the pap smear, handing Dr. Hadden various swabs, etc., during the rest of the exam, she once again turned away and essentially faced the counter as though she had something engrossing to do. The countertop was empty, and she was simply standing idly." Diane addressed this letter to Mr. Harold Fox, the acting chair of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the Columbian Presbyterian Medical Center. She also sent a copy of this letter to the medical center's risk management office, hoping that she could create a record. Diane received a response letter back from Dr. Fox around 2 weeks later. The date of this letter was June 14th, 1994. In this letter, Dr. Fox thanked Diane for recounting her concerns regarding the care provided by Dr. Hadden. He promised to follow up immediately and to have a conversation with Dr. Hadden. This letter ended by saying, "I hope that your pregnancy outcome was excellent. I'm sorry, but I feel like that is such a slap in the face when you have just written to a hospital explaining what has happened to you." And then they just... that is a serious slap in the face. Diane, who's now 63, never heard anything back from the hospital. She said that she had no idea if anybody actually spoke to Dr. Hadden after she raised her concerns, but she thought that the hospital would have dealt with it. She said, "I thought, this is Columbia. This is a top-tier university. I thought, thank heavens this is at Columbia, because they will keep this letter. They will put it in a file, whatever file they keep on their doctors. It will be there in a prominent way. It will be marked, and surely in the next few years he'll either get verbal or written complaints, and they will do something." And I just felt confident that would happen. In 2012, Dr. Hadden was arrested after a patient claimed that he licked her vagina during an appointment. And this was then voided, and he went back to work for a month before he was finally taken from his post. In 2014, he was then arrested again. This was following an investigation by the Manhattan DA's office. A woman named Laurie Kanyok was 27 years old when she fell pregnant in 2011. Her gynecologist, Dr. Robert Hadden. On her first appointment with Dr. Hadden, she recalls that the mild-mannered and prominent doctor inspired trust, but she would very quickly learn differently. On one occasion, under the guise of checking her cervix dilation, Dr. Hadden subjected her to a pelvic exam so forceful that he managed to lift her off of the chair that she was sitting on while she was gripping onto the arms. It then caused her to bleed afterwards. But having no prior experience, Laurie suppressed any doubts that she had, and she trusted in her doctor. I think this is absolutely terrifying. So this is probably another reason how this has happened so much, how he managed to do this to so many people, because people trust their physicians, they trust their gynecologist. You know, these people are supposed to be trained, they're supposed, you're supposed to be able to trust these people. So a lot of these people probably don't even know what he was doing was wrong until it got brought out in the news. Thankfully, Dr. Hadden wasn't on call when Laurie went into labour, and she had a wonderful group of women assist with her birth. It was at this point that she realised that what she had come to accept was normal was anything but. She explained, "When I was close to delivering, the gal came in to check my dilation and it was as if nothing was going on. And I was sort of like, okay, that was different." But even then, she would have let it go if it wasn't for what happened at her 6-week postnatal checkup. At first, he did the entire consultation with the nurse present in the room. He then started saying things about her weight, about how she'd lost loads of weight, and about how she was looking really good. She said that the comments seemed pretty out of place, but she kind of just let it slide. But after the exam had finished and the nurse had left the room, Dr. Hadden told Laurie, who was still completely unclothed at this point, that he wanted to check something else, and he asked her to lie back down on the bed. She said, "Didn't you just do the exam?" He then said, "Just lie back down, I want to check something." To which he replied, "No, just lay back down and let me check one more time." Laurie, who had trusted her doctor, lay back down and put her feet back into the stirrups. Dr. Hadden then covered her over with a blanket, pulled the blanket tight, ducked his head underneath the blanket, and licked her where he shouldn't have. Laurie then jumped off the table, got dressed, and walked straight out. She walked straight past his office, straight past the reception, and was heading right out the door. Just as she was reaching the exit of the building, Dr. Hadden came running down the corridor after her, shouting, "Laurie, you forgot your contraceptive prescription." Laurie then reluctantly went back to Dr. Hadden's office, where he sat flicking through his prescription book. She says that she feels like he was trying to gauge her reaction, gauge her mood, gauge how she was feeling, basically. He then insisted on walking her out of the building, rubbing her back, and making small talk as he did. The first thing Laurie did as soon as she got out was text her best friend and the father of her child. They then encouraged her to go to the police. Laurie made a call to the police while in the Uber on her way home. Now, when she got home to a voicemail left on her mobile phone from Dr. Hadden, which seemed quite agitated. She explained, "He said, I understand something happened that you're not happy with during your visit. And he's saying, why don't you come back and we'll talk about it face to face." And then the call got progressively more agitated, and at the end it was sort of manic and frantic, and said, "I'm really upset too," and he hung up the phone. Laurie then played that voicemail to the police, who went to go and arrest Dr. Hadden. Laurie did a rape kit, and it came back saying that the saliva was a 98 to 99% match to Dr. Hadden. Yet only a few months later, she gets a call from the district attorney's office saying that the case had been dropped due to lack of evidence. Laurie said, "I was in shock. I said, this is insane. I was told to file a civil suit." Laurie did exactly that, and it was the decision from this that sparked the DA's office reopening the case. Her attorney did a blurb in a newspaper, which resulted in quite a few more women coming forward. And then Laurie had to go and testify at trial. Hadden was charged with 9 counts of sexual misconduct and assault. But in 2016, Dr. Hadden took a plea deal which allowed him to plead guilty to only what happened to Laurie, and he would just have to surrender his license, but he would avoid any jail time. Laurie was casting a major Broadway musical when she got the news. She said, "I was numb. I said, what do you mean you're giving him a plea deal? What about the other women you're not acknowledging?" She was then told that many of these cases were outside the statute of limitations, which for cases like this, believe it or not, is only 1 year. When Evelyn Yang heard about the plea deal, she said that justice was not served. She said, "It's like getting slapped in the face and punched in the gut. The DA's office is meant to protect us. It's meant to serve justice, and there's no justice here." Laurie settled her civil case in 2017, and she was told to go and get on with her life and go and raise her daughter, which she has been trying to do. But something like this, it just doesn't ever leave you. Laurie said, "This is a gynecologist. This is your most vulnerable state as a female. How does an institution allow this? That messes with your psyche. There's no dollar amount, there is no time, there is no fix to that. I didn't feel anything except what's wrong with the system that lets this person be free. I'm tough, I can handle a lot, but this is the suit that you can never get off. You can never get rid of it. You can be happy, you can go on holiday, I can have a birthday party, I could do lots of things, but at the end of the day, it's there. And I was supposed to have won. What did I win? All I could think was, I signed this piece of paper and accepted the money. For what? Then in 2020, when Laurie saw Evelyn's story in the news, she felt like it was quite bittersweet because she realised that Evelyn had been assaulted after Laurie herself had come forward and told the police about what had happened to her. She explained, Evelyn Yang was assaulted after me. I couldn't let that go. Then I found out there was a woman who wrote a letter in 1993 to the hospital, and they responded saying they'll get to the bottom of this. And that was it. They dropped it. Essentially, it should never have happened to me because she made them aware. It should never have happened to Evelyn because I called the police and I made them aware, but they were still allowing this behaviour. A suit was then brought against the hospital. This class action lawsuit contains numerous accounts of various assaults that all kind of mirror and echo one another. These claims include that Dr. Hadden touched his tongue to patients' genitals, had patients remove clothing for no legitimate medical purpose, conducted prolonged and wholly medically unnecessary breast examinations, and performed medically unnecessary internal exams, often with ungloved hands. 79 of Hadden's previous patients have managed to reach a settlement with the hospital, allowing them to seek £171 million from the Victims' Compensations Fund. A spokesperson from Columbia University said, Hadden's arrest was voided within hours. No one at Columbia at the time had any knowledge of any prior allegations of misconduct. We regret that he saw patients again for several weeks. This whole Dr. Hadden situation has actually sparked a change in New York law, which now allows for parents to take their obstetric's name off of the birth certificate if they have had their license revoked for misconduct. This legislation stemmed from a woman named Marissa Hostetter's claims against Hadden. Marissa was another woman who claimed that Dr. Hadden put his tongue on her genitals, but adding to her pain was the fact that her twins were delivered by C-section, and Dr. Hadden would have been the one that actually performed that surgery. Marissa said when recalling this ordeal, his hands cut me open, reached inside my body, and were the first hands to touch my children. That's an incredible position of privilege that I gave this person. So when Marissa needed her girls' birth certificates to register them for kindergarten, when she saw Dr. Hadden's name on it, it made her stomach turn. The last thing that she needed was a reminder on the document that both legally and symbolically marked the start of her children's lives. She said, I felt sick. Oh my God, why is his name there? This realization sparked a years-long effort that resulted in new legislation stating that a doctor's name can be removed from a child's birth certificate if that doctor's license has been revoked for misconduct. Doctors' names are only included on the long-form birth certificates in New York City. Under the new law, parents wishing to take the name off of a birth certificate can do so by paying a small fee and provide a printout from the State Office Professional Medical Conduct stating that the doctor has had their license revoked because of misconduct. So many women have come forward to recount their stories of abuse by Dr. Hadden, so many that it would take me hours, days even, to go through all of them. Some of these stories even include stories of minors. I'm not going to go into the stories of the minors, but there were minors in amongst these victims. And a lot of these stories, as I've already said, kind of seem to mirror each other. So it all seemed to be kind of a theme. Dr. Hadden would begin by asking medically inappropriate questions, and then as soon as he got the patient on their own or the nurse wasn't looking, he would then assault them. This is a sickening abuse of power. People put their trust in him, and he violated them. On Tuesday, the 25th of July 2023, Dr. Robert Hadden was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The government managed to prove at the trial that Dr. Hadden sexually assaulted dozens of women under the guise of medical care. The official press release following his conviction said that he had been doing this for 25 years, from 1987 until 2012. Dr. Hadden abused and assaulted at least dozens of women, some of which repeatedly. Dr. Hadden used his position as a medical professional employed by a very prestigious hospital to make or attempt to make his victims feel as though the abuse that he was inflicting upon them was medically necessary. Dr. Hadden also encouraged his victims to return to see him. He would schedule follow-up appointments at which he would continue to assault them. Dr. Hadden caused 4 of his victims to actually have to cross state lines to come to their appointments. That's how far he made people go. He would build a rapport with these victims, and then he would ask very unprompted personal questions about their sexual activity, about their sex positions, about whether they could achieve an orgasm, and then he would provide unsolicited advice on these topics. He also used so-called breast and vaginal exams to cover up for what he was doing. He would then isolate his patients and to conduct these examinations. Dr. Hadden sexually assaulted his victims in many ways, including massaging and groping breasts for a prolonged period, groping both breasts at the same time, pinching, twisting, or otherwise manipulating a victim's nipples, extracting the colostrum from a victim's breasts and tasting it. Yeah, ew. Digitally penetrating and or rubbing a victim's genitals, and licking patients' genitals. Each of these abusive acts was committed with no valid medical purpose and under the guise of medical care. At the sentencing, Judge Bierman imposed the maximum penalty for each of the charges and set them to run concurrently. The court described the defendant's conduct as exceptional and unprecedented, shocking in the extreme, horrific and depraved. In imposing this sentence, the court discussed, among other things, the magnitude and scope of the defendant's serial sexual abuse, its unchecked nature, the defendant's skillfulness at deception, the predatory nature of his sex crimes, and the fact that the defendant preyed on vulnerable patients who trusted him, thereby repeatedly violating a woman's right to decide what happens to her body. In addition to the 20-year prison sentence, Dr. Hadden was given a lifetime supervision order and made to pay a $10,000 fine and $400 in court fees. 11 victims gave impact statements during the trial, saying things like, "He's a sexual predator disguised in a white coat," and "I'm so broken that day-to-day survival is a challenge." One of the victims said that she was 17 years old, undocumented, and pregnant when she was abused by Dr. Hadden. When he was given the chance to speak, a sobbing Dr. Hadden stood up and said that there was quite a lot that he would like to say, but his lawyers had told him to keep it brief. So he just said, "I'm very sorry for all the pain I have caused." He then dropped his head back down again, took off his glasses, and wiped a tear from his eye. When the judge announced the day before the sentencing that he intended to impose a 20-year sentence on Dr. Hadden, Dr. Hadden's lawyer said that he was being quite harsh. The lawyer said, "Here you have somebody that's already lost everything and you're effectively giving him a life sentence." She said that her client was enduring quite harsh jail conditions at a federal lockup in Brooklyn. She explained that the inmates there are giving him threats and trying to extort him for his commissary money. But Assistant US Attorney Jane Kim said that Dr. Hadden still hadn't shown any kind of remorse for what he had done, and that he still had the sexual disorders that he had when he carried out his career of abuse.
I don't know if we'll ever have closure, to be honest with you, Safan, because the reality for me now is, why was this covered up for so long?
We were nervous just because justice hadn't been served before. And when the first guilty verdict came in, I think what you heard were screams of joy, pure. We were all waiting to be just disappointed again.
I've waited for this day for so long. So many of us have waited for this day for so long. And it's just relief, the relief. And the fact that the jury came back with their verdict so quickly.
There's no defense. You were there a lot too. There was literally no defense. And their argument was sort of a masterclass in gaslighting hundreds of women who know very specifically what happened to them.
To be honest with you, I think that sentence is more than fair. He should be sentenced to life in prison for abusing so many people. You know, as I say, he's a doctor. And these are the people that we put our trust in. They're supposed to take care of us. They're supposed to, you know, they're not supposed to violate us. I'm just glad that he is now behind bars and that the people that he's abused can finally move forward, and rest assured that he is not going to be able to do that to anybody else. Now, I think that is all for that story. Thank you very much for watching. If you're new and you don't know what I do here, I tell hardship stories. So I tell everyday people stories, I tell celebrity stories, I tell stories that I find in the news. So if you have a story that you would like to share or something that you would like me to talk about, then you can contact me via my email, which I'll leave linked in the description box down below. Otherwise, please like this video and subscribe. It is a free and easy way that you can support this channel. And until next time, please remember to be kind to everybody around you, because you never know what someone else might be going through, and a little bit of kindness and compassion can go a long way. Bye bye for now.